This week, the Jubilee excludes no one, and we have details on who is celebrating with the Pope next. Do we have enough priests to meet demand? And what does the Pope have to do with the economic crisis in Venezuela? Hello and welcome to another edition of Vatican Connections. There's a lot going on, so let's take a look. The Jubilee Year for Mercy excludes no one. The Vatican announced some more Jubilee Year celebrations that Pope Francis will take part in. First, he will celebrate the Jubilee for priests. It will be a 3-day event beginning June 1st. 3 churches in Rome will be opened especially so that the priests participating in this celebration can take part in the sacrament of reconciliation themselves. On June 2nd, Pope Francis will lead a day of retreat for the priests, and on June 3rd, he will celebrate a special Jubilee Mass with his brother priests. This Jubilee celebration is open to priests and seminarians from around the world. Now, they must register to take part in the event by May 13th on the Jubilee website. The Vatican has released Pope Francis's prayer intentions for the month of May. Sharing those intentions in his own words is Pope Francis himself.
Es innegable el aporte de la mujer en todas las áreas del quehacer humano, empezando por la familia. Pero con solo reconocerlo, ¿es suficiente? Hemos hecho muy poco por las mujeres que se encuentran en situaciones muy duras, despreciadas, marginadas e incluso reducidas a la esclavitud. Debemos condenar la violencia sexual que sufren las mujeres y eliminar los obstáculos que impiden su plena inserción en la vida social, política y económica. Si pensás que esto es justo, manifestá esta petición conmigo, para que en todos los países del mundo las mujeres sean honradas y respetadas y sea valorizado su imprescindible aporte social.
Later this year, the Vatican will host another Jubilee celebration, this one with homeless people from all over Europe. The event, called the European Festival of Joy and Mercy, is being organized by the Fratello Association. About 6,000 homeless, marginalized, and vulnerable people are expected to take part in the pilgrimage to Rome, which will include the Stations of the Cross at the Colosseum, an audience with Pope Francis, a papal mass, and a prayer vigil with Cardinal Pell of Lyon, France. For more information about the pilgrimage, visit the Fratello website, fratello2016.org. Now, in the history of the Church, it was common for popes to get involved in international politics. That hasn't happened in a while, but Pope Francis is rediscovering that habit, and he's using his influence where he can to make things better. We learned this week that he wrote personally to the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, urging him to find a solution to the problems facing the country. Vatican spokesperson, Father Federico Lombardi, said the Pope follows the situation in Venezuela with a lot of attention and participation. Now, on Wednesday, Pope Francis met the father of the leader of Venezuela's opposition party, Leopoldo Lopez, who has been in jail for 2 years just because he opposes President Maduro. Lopez's father told journalists he met first with Pope Francis, who blessed him and assured him of his prayers for all political prisoners. Leopoldo Lopez Sr. also gave the Pope a book written by his son. He said the meeting gave him great hope. And after the meeting with the Pope, the politician's father met with the Vatican's Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, who was previously the papal nuncio to Venezuela. He asked Lopez's father for updates on the political situation in the country, and he shared some of the contents of the Pope's letter to Nicolas Maduro, and he said the Vatican and the Church is committed to working towards peace in that country. And we are less than 100 days away from World Youth Day. Preparations are in the final stages, and here's an update from the local organizing committee on some of the sites that will be open to pilgrims in Krakow.
By 1500, Krakow was not only one of the richest cities in Europe, but it was also one of the most fortified. St. Florian Gate was the main entrance in which kings would return to Krakow following victorious battles. This route, which leads down Florianska Street onto Wawel, is known as the Royal Way. Now let's get into this news for this week. On June 18th, a pilgrimage of motorcyclists will leave Krakow and 4 days later meet with Pope Francis at St. Peter's Square in Rome. The goal of the pilgrimage, which is organized in cooperation with the Malopolska region, is the promotion of Poland and spiritual preparation 1 month before World Youth Day. Pilgrims will go through Slovakia, Austria, and Germany. They will present a gift to the Holy Father, which will be a white leather jacket with the World Youth Day logo on the back. For World Youth Day, Via Lichka Salt Mine is preparing special arrangements for pilgrims. The World Youth Day logo was immersed in a saline lake in a chamber found 101 meters under the ground. And from July 23rd to August 3rd, the salt mine hours will be extended until 9:30 p.m. and visitors will be able to stay until midnight. Tickets can be purchased and reserved on the salt mine website. Over 40,000 pilgrims have reserved tickets, including Canada, Singapore, Taiwan, and the US. And that was this week's World Youth Day Minute. Continue praying for us, and we'll see you next week.
Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican's Secretary of State, is causing a little bit of a stir. Speaking to journalists after helping launch a new women's section of the L'Osservatore Romano newspaper, he made a rather bold statement about women in the Church. He told reporters a woman could be the Secretary of State for the Vatican, and then he explained that the role of Secretary of State is not tied to the priesthood or to sacraments, so a woman could take that job. He then added, "Let's look at the path that has been traveled, and the Lord will tell us how far we can go." Now, some canon lawyers and theologians might dispute his statement, but his comment is in line with Pope Francis's desire to find a greater role for women in the Church. Did you know? The Vatican's Secretary of State is like the Prime Minister or Foreign Affairs Minister of a country. The Vatican has had a Secretary of State as far back as 1651, when Cardinal Fabio Chigi held the post. He went on to become Pope Alexander VII. It is ordination season around the world. Pope Francis recently ordained new priests at St. Peter's, and dioceses everywhere are doing the same almost every weekend. Now, Catholic News Service brings us this look at the realities that the Church is facing when it comes to vocations and new priests.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death.
Hail Mary, full
We do have a priest shortage for sure.
blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray
The numbers that we have coming into the seminary, applying to seminary, is not sufficient to keep up with the number of priests retiring, and that has to be considered in the larger perspective of the state of the Catholic Church in our country. You know, that we have a lot of work to do evangelizing our people, that it's only when our young people know Christ that they can learn to respond to his call.
John Paul II, Pope Benedict, Pope Francis have all emphasized that the priest needs to focus on those things that uniquely only he can do, which means the laity can work together and the priest can give some of those responsibilities that in the last 100 years the priest has taken on. A great example of that is the everyday administration of a parish. A priest doesn't necessarily need to be a banker or an accountant for the parish. Lay people are qualified, they're educated. They can run those dimensions of parish life, allowing the priest to focus on that which only he can do, which is to make Jesus present in the Eucharist, to go and anoint the dying, to baptize the newborns, and to go out into the world and spend his whole life devoted to the proclamation of the gospel and the good news.
We need more because God's people need the sacraments. God's people need to have priests in their lives to act in the person of Christ, bringing them the sacraments, bringing them the Word of God. The lay people do a wonderful ministry within our parishes, within our dioceses, and they're such an important and vital part of the church. But even the lay people will tell you, we want priests. We want good, holy men who are priests for us and will serve us as Christ served his people. So we continue to seek out those men who are listening to that call.
In talking to our priests and our seminarians, I emphasize the virtue of trust. We really don't know what the future will be like for our church, our nation, our world, our diocese. So when a young man is ordained, he is making that profound sense of trust that he's putting himself in God's hands. He's putting himself in the hands of the church, saying, I want to serve. Regardless of what the future will be like, I want to serve.
This is actually a wonderful time to be a priest. It's very positive. It's good because there's a lot of work to be done. And I think it's only in doing the work, doing the ministry, that we find fulfillment. So in some ways, I think it's a very exciting time. It's a challenging time. But those two things go together.
It's time to take a look now at what Pope Francis has been doing this week. On Monday, he met with priests taking part in the general chapter of the Order of the Blessed Virgin Mary of Mercy, also known as the Mercedarians. The main theme of their chapter was their upcoming 800th anniversary. Pope Francis said an anniversary is a good time to not only look back on past achievements, but also look forward to continuing their mission. He also said, being a prophet means lending out the human voice to the eternal word, forgetting ourselves so that God may manifest himself in our weakness. Also on Monday, Pope Francis received the directors of the Cervantes Institute. It promotes the Spanish language and culture around the world. Pope Francis was given his own copy of Don Quixote. And Wednesday was a full day. Before the general audience, Pope Francis met with a group of people who were participating in a colloquium that was organized by Jordan's Royal Institute for Interfaith Studies. He greeted the participants and recalled his own visit to Jordan. He told the participants the work they are doing is construction work. It involves dialogue, and that means leaving yourself behind and listening to the other. Now, he ended by saying, we all have one Father. Let's continue on that path. The main part of the day was, of course, the general audience, and Catholic News Service has details.
Conosciamo tutti l'immagine del buon pastore che si carica sulle spalle la pecorella smarrita. La parabola viene raccontata da Gesù per far comprendere che la sua vicinanza ai peccatori non deve scandalizzare, ma al contrario provocare in tutti una seria riflessione su come viviamo la nostra fede. Dio non conosce la nostra attuale cultura dello scarto. In Dio non c'entra questo. Dio non scarta nessuna persona. Dio ama tutti, cerca tutti, uno per uno. Lui non conosce questa parola scartare la gente, perché tutto amore e tutta misericordia. Questo dobbiamo capirlo bene. Per Dio nessuno è definitivamente perduto. Mai, fino all'ultimo momento, Dio ci cerca. Pensate al buon ladrone.
Thursday was the Feast of the Ascension, and it was a Vatican holiday, but it was not a day off for Pope Francis. He led a prayer vigil that was called a vigil to dry the tears of all those in need of consolation. Especially for this vigil, the relics of Our Lady of the Tears of Syracuse were placed on display for veneration at St. Peter's. Now, back in 1953, a painting of Mary was placed over the bed of a young married couple in Syracuse, Italy. One day, the image began to cry. Of course, testing revealed that the tears were human, and the reliquary on display is a vial containing those tears. Catholic News Service has more on that vigil.
Le più amare sono quelle provocate dalla malvagità umana, le lacrime di chi si è visto strappare violentemente una persona cara, lacrime di nonni, di mamme e papà, di bambini. Ci sono occhi che spesso rimangono fissi sul tramonto e stentano a vedere l'alba di un giorno nuovo. Abbiamo bisogno di misericordia, della consolazione che viene dal Signore. Tutti ne abbiamo bisogno. E la nostra povertà, ma anche la nostra grandezza. Invocare la consolazione di Dio che con la sua tenerezza viene ad asciugare le lacrime sul nostro volto. La preghiera è la vera medicina per la nostra sofferenza. Anche noi, nella preghiera, possiamo sentire la presenza di Dio accanto a noi. La tenerezza del suo sguardo ci consola, la forza della sua parola ci sostiene, infondendo speranza. La forza dell'amore trasforma la sofferenza nella certezza della vittoria di Cristo e nostra vittoria con Lui, e nella speranza che un giorno saremo di nuovo insieme e contempleremo per sempre il volto della Trinità Santissima, eterna sorgente della vita e dell'amore.
On Friday, Pope Francis received the Charlemagne Prize. The prize is awarded to recognize work that is done in service of European unification. It's named after King Charlemagne, the first Holy Roman Emperor, who is also considered the father of Europe. The prize citation commended the Pope's message of peace and understanding, as well as compassion, tolerance, solidarity, and the integrity of creation throughout his pontificate. The President of the European Parliament, Martin Schulz, and several other European officials were on hand to award the prize. German Chancellor Angela Merkel was also attending the ceremony. On Saturday, Pope Francis will hold a special audience with an organization of doctors who volunteer their services in Africa. And on Sunday, the Holy Father will lead the Regina Coeli at St. Peter's.
Clasping the banner in his left hand, the new Swiss Guard raises his right hand high and distinctly opens 3 fingers, a symbol of his faith in the Holy Trinity, before taking an oath that will bind him to the oldest standing army in the world. In a historic ceremony in the Vatican, 32 new Swiss Guards were sworn in on the day in which we mark the sacrifice of the 147 who laid down their lives in defense of the Pope during the sack of Rome in 1527. Each of them promises to serve the pontiff with faith and honor, sacrificing, should it be necessary, even their lives. Inspired by this promise, Swiss Guard Commander Christoph Graf noted that in view of the current situation of international tensions, such an oath requires great conviction.
Time to look now at the resignations and nominations that happened this week. First up, Cardinal George Pell. He is the head of the Secretariat for the Economy and the person in charge of rolling out many of the economic and administrative reforms going on inside Vatican walls. He turns 75 in June, and by canon law, he should retire. Actually, he should have already handed in his letter of resignation by now. But we learned this week that Pope Francis will keep him on in his current job past the age of 75. This week, Pope Francis visited the offices of the Secretariat for the Economy and spent an hour in what was called a friendly and lively chat with the staff. And one of the topics discussed was Cardinal Pell's upcoming 75th birthday. In a statement released by Cardinal Pell's office after that visit, it was announced Cardinal Pell will stay on in his current role for a full 5-year term. Cardinal Pell was appointed to this job in 2014, so that means he'll be there until 2019. That's good news for the reforms being carried out, and bad news for anyone who doesn't like his changes. In Australia, Pope Francis appointed a new bishop for the Diocese of Parramatta. Bishop Vincent Long Van Nguyen will move from Melbourne, where he is currently an auxiliary, to Parramatta. He was actually born in Vietnam's Dong Nai province and was one of the hundreds of thousands of boat people who fled Vietnam in the 70s and 80s. He entered the seminary first in Vietnam, but the Communist Liberation Army took over the seminary and turned it into their barracks, so that ended his dreams of the priesthood. Once he was in Australia, he joined the Franciscan Friars. Now, the Diocese of Parramatta has been without a bishop since September 2014, when Bishop Colin Fisher was made Archbishop of Sydney. And speaking of Sydney, it's not an appointment, but it is a very welcome update. Archbishop Colin Fisher left a rehabilitation hospital this week after 4 months of being treated for a rare autoimmune disease. He fell ill just before Christmas and was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome, which left him paralyzed, and he will gradually return to work. Pope Francis has also named a new papal nuncio for Papua New Guinea. Father Kurian Vajjalungkal moves from being a nunciator counselor to being a nuncio. That's it for this edition of Vatican Connections. Join us again next time. Of course, until then, you can follow us on Twitter, check our blog for updates, or watch us on Roku TV on demand. From everyone here, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you again next time.